Absa's Africa Financial Market Index has South Africa topping the ranks for the second consecutive year. The index is produced by the official Monetary and Financial Institutions Forum, and with more on Africa's most attractive financial markets is George Asante, who is the head of global markets at Absa Corporate and Investment Bank. George, thanks so much for your time. All right, so the second year into this index, remind us again how it is you collate all of this data.
Thank you very much, Fifi, and to your viewers as well. So the Absa Africa Financial Markets Index is an index that measures the maturity of the various African markets, and it also measures the investor friendliness of the markets, the ease of accessibility of the markets, and it's really a tool for market participants to discuss financial market development issues and give policymakers a common reference point to discuss issues that has to do with the development of the financial markets.
Sure. I mean, that South Africa ranks highly when it comes to the sophistication of financial markets. I think it won't really come as a surprise to most people, because across many surveys of measuring as financial markets or financial institutional strength, we rank highly. What interested me was Nigeria and the spot that it occupies in terms of market transparency and also tax. In fact, I think slightly higher than South Africa. Help me understand what's going on there.
So Nigeria is a market where from a top to the down, I mean, there is a lot of interest in building a financial market that enables investors and other market participants to execute their transactions easily. And one of the things we've seen after the first publication of the index to the next publication of index, which is 2017 versus 2018, is a lot of work being done by the authorities in Nigeria to make sure that they position their market in a way that facilitates transactions within the market. So you talk about issues like the tax environment and signing of tax treaties for people who participate in the Nigerian financial market. There is a lot of work that has gone in, done by the authorities within Nigeria in terms of making trading on the stock exchange, for example, trading by individuals online. There's a lot of effort that has gone in. So you can see that South Africa still has a very high mark within that particular pillar of the index, but Nigeria is also doing a lot more within that pillar. So those two contenders are actually doing very well and setting a very good example for the rest of the continent.
No, an interesting light, particularly on the country in the light of what is going on with MTN and the criticisms regarding Nigeria's regulatory environment and tax as well. So quite an interesting finding here. Rwanda, I mean, quite a hot spot for a lot of investors presently, but I see that it ranks quite low on the overall index. Why?
Yeah, so again, I mean, the Absa Financial Markets Index is an index that doesn't necessarily measure everything about the financial services sector. It is specifically dealing with the issue of financial marketing infrastructure, and also dealing with the ease of accessibility of products within the financial market. So it's important that you make that distinction. And then it also touches a little bit on growth and growth potential from a macroeconomic perspective, but that is not the main driver of an investment or for an investor to decide to whether invest in Rwanda or to invest in Kenya. There are so many other factors which include market depth and the liquidity that you can get in products within the market, the enforceability of contracts within the market, talks about things like transparency of market data and for ability for investors to be able to value their investment. And if you look at all that together as a package, you realize that countries like Kenya, South Africa, Ghana, etc. are way ahead of a country like Rwanda, where, as you rightly pointed out, economic growth is impressive, but when it comes to financial market infrastructure, there is a lot more that has to be done. And for us, that presents a good opportunity for Rwanda. If Rwanda is able to complement its economic growth with an equal emphasis on financial market architecture, then growth can actually be much higher than we see today.
But of course, on the other side of the coin, you've got a situation where if investors are able to get their money in and out of a country very easily, when it's time to get out, they rarely get out, as we have seen in South Africa's case, given the inflow, the outflows of cash going back to the US market. So that also presents a bit of a downside risks for the economy.
Absolutely. I mean, the index has 6 pillars, and one of the pillars which has an equal weighting is what we call the access to foreign exchange. And as you rightly said, a market like South Africa is so deep. If an investor brings money, the ease of taking the money out, there is no question about it. Then you go to a market like Angola, where you can invest, but when it comes to taking your money out, it's not the same kind of possibility as you see for South Africa. And therefore, what this index tries to throw light on is to tell authorities that, listen, it's great to have a great return on a product or a great return or growth potential in a market, but that is not all that the investor looks at. The investor looks at a great potential on the market in terms of growth and the yield that you pay, but at the end of the day, his ability to take money out of the market is equally critical. And therefore, it highlights that as a key thing that all the markets need to look at. And we've seen that in places like Nigeria, where they've done something about access to foreign exchange, and that has immediately led to a lot of investment coming in, similar to what you see in South Africa.
Yeah. George, I mean, the challenge I see, the major challenge for the continent, you highlight in your report, you refer to the capacity of local investors, the lack of knowledge and expertise of pension fund trustees. What do you mean by that?
So, having a local investment community that is able to support all products within the market is so critical for any financial market. So if you look at South Africa, for example, you have a very strong participation from local asset managers, local pension funds, local banks, etc., in terms of accessing and pricing and participating in the financial market of South Africa. And sometimes you may not be able to say the same in other markets. Now, the importance of having such a strong sector of local participants in local markets is that there are times when foreign investors who come in may not necessarily want local assets and they will want to exit. And when they are exiting, you need a local investment community to be able to stop out or to be able to take what the foreigners are leaving. Right? So that is so important. Now, number two, in the context of Africa, we've seen a lot of government policies that tries to put a cap on how much foreigners can invest in the market. So there may be an IPO in Tanzania or Ghana where there is a cap on how much foreigners can bring in. And at the same time, you have a local investment community which is unable to take the rest which government expects them to take. So it is so critical to build a strong local investment community, which we haven't seen much. I mean, the index actually shows that the capacity of local investors in investing in the different markets is very low, and it's one area where there needs to be improvement. And the improvement can come in two fronts. One is education, which in most cases is lacking. Education of trustees, education of people who manage balance sheets of state, corporations, etc. The second really has to do with regulation. So we've seen across the continent that there is instances where products are available, but regulatory regimes don't necessarily allow investors to buy those products.
Sure.
And therefore risk is not diversified and returns are normally not as enhanced as you would normally want it to be.
Sure.
So that is really what that pillar talks about.
Yeah, I mean, this also speaks to a major criticism also of many African economies, and the fact that because their financial markets are not as developed, you've got a plethora of countries that are tapping into the foreign markets to do things like raise capital, and this is such a burden on their own balance sheet when things like the US dollar and all of that get stronger because of what's happening in the US. What do you think the major challenge has been for many African countries in developing the infrastructure around their local financial markets?
So the key thing really has to do with regulation and education, right?
Okay.
And there is a bit of it which talks about liberalizing sectors like the pension sector, where you find in a couple of African countries there is just one pension fund, and therefore there is not much competition, and return on assets of that one pension fund may not be as optimized as
like
you would
here
want
in South Africa.
Like here in South Africa, I mean, where you have a whole a set of pension funds, asset money, there's a lot of competition, a lot of innovation, and you see a real value add to people who invest with these pension funds and asset managers.
Sure.
But you may not necessarily find that in the rest of the continent. So liberalization of the pension sector is a key one, and it's something that is highlighted by the index, that if you want your market to build and develop, you need to liberalize the pension sector. It's a very key enabler. The second one is to create regulation that enables the pension fund sector and the asset management and insurance funds sector to really participate in the market. So we've seen the listing of ETFs, for example, across the continent, but participation has been low. Why? Because of two things. In some instances, regulations actually don't allow you to invest in anything except government bonds and things that may be related to equity directly, right? In other instances, it may be an issue of education, which are all highlighted in the index, and we hope that this really becomes a reference for people to discuss what do we need to do to position Africa competitively on the global stage.
Well,